Good afternoon. My name is Tim Gysan. I'm the Senior Project Manager with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Jacksonville District, and I am the Project Manager for the Lake Okeechobee System Operating Manual update that is currently in progress. Because a lot of you are probably new to this effort, I want to do a quick overview of kind of where we've been and then get into where we are moving towards. All right, starting off, everybody probably knows Lake Okeechobee, but if not, lies right in the center of the state of Florida, and it's the heart of our water resource system for central and southern Florida. The lake and Herbert Hoover Dike, which surrounds the lake, are both part of the Central and Southern Florida Project, which was authorized in 1948 for flood control and other purposes for the folks in Florida, including water supply and environmental benefits. The Corps of Engineers operates the lake itself, and in partnership with the South Florida Water Management District, operates the entire CNSF system. Lake operations are governed by a manual developed through a public process. In this case, it's the System Operating Manual, volume number 3, which includes Lake Okeechobee and the EAA. What are we doing? We are reviewing lake operations. Simple as that. How are we managing the lake and how are we making releases throughout the year? What will result is an operational plan for Lake Okeechobee. This effort is not recommending any new infrastructure. It's strictly an operational plan for the lake. So that's important to remember because there are structural limitations throughout the system which make it very challenging to meet all of the needs of all of our stakeholders through just an operational plan, and we'll touch on that a bit later. Why are we doing it now? A couple of reasons. We've got a lot of huge infrastructure which is about to come online, including the completion of Herbert Hoover Dike rehabilitation, as well as a couple of CERP, or Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan projects at C-44 and the C-43 reservoirs. We also received an additional authorization in WRDA 2018, which instructed the Corps to expedite completion of the Lake Okeechobee manual to coincide with completion of Herbert Hoover Dike in 2022. And part of that came about in response to some of the large algal blooms which we've seen in the system, which have provided a lot of concerns for stakeholders on both coasts as well as on the lake. As you can imagine, with a system this big and so many users which count on Lake Okeechobee for water, for many different needs, whether they be for water supply, for agriculture, or drinking water, or environmental needs, not only for the lake and its resources, but for the greater Everglades to the south and the estuaries to the east and the west. There are a lot of different needs and different views on how the lake should be managed. Now, I won't read these. You can kind of take a look at those. But as you can imagine, those perspectives vary greatly depending on where you are within the system and what your need is for Lake Okeechobee. And that creates a very big challenge as we try to develop operations for the lake to meet all of those project needs. From the very beginning, because of those varying stakeholder needs and perspectives on lake management, the Corps deliberately has made this a very involved process, bringing in our PDT, our project delivery team, as well as members of the public throughout the process. We felt it was extremely important to engage everyone throughout the process and bring them along stepwise with us as we go through this effort to develop this new manual. That started back in early 2019 with 10 public scoping meetings throughout different parts of the state around the lake, which led us to development of our project goals and objectives. I'll come back to this slide and we'll talk about more of that process, but I wanted to go straight to those goals and objectives. So our study goal developed through this intense interaction with the PDT and the stakeholders resulted in a goal to incorporate flexibility in Lake Okeechobee operations while balancing our congressionally authorized purposes. And those purposes include flood control, enhancement of fish and wildlife, recreation, water supply, and navigation. Our study objectives, of which there are 4, have many parts to them. So our first objective is to manage the risk to public health and safety, life and property, and primarily that has been from a dam safety perspective. But as this study has unfolded, that also includes algal bloom risk, both in the lake and in the northern estuaries. Our second objective was to continue to meet the authorized purposes for navigation, recreation, and flood control. And basically that means we want to continue doing what we're doing for those areas. We're not formulating to try to improve navigation, recreation, or flood control, but those may be enhanced through the final plan that we end up with. Objective 3 is to improve water supply performance for varying areas that count on the lake, including the Seminole Tribe of Florida, the Lake Okeechobee service area, and the lower East Coast service area. And finally, our fourth objective is to enhance lake ecology, in Lake Okeechobee, northern estuaries, and across the South Florida system. And of course, that includes Lake Okeechobee, the Caloosahatchee Estuary, the St. Lucie Estuary, and the Everglades in South Florida down to Florida Bay. Going back to our process, it led from the development of goals to then intense development of performance metrics, how we're going to evaluate the performance of the lake schedule alternatives which we look at. That happened throughout 2019 and into 2020. And then we moved on to our next phase, which was development of operational scenarios or alternatives. And that was a multi-phased effort, which started with conceptual plan development, which were focused on trying to maximize benefits for one part of the system. We ran over 120,000 model runs during that phase, which gave us a lot of information on how performance in one area may affect performance in other areas. We whittled that number down to in our first iteration to 16 plans, which kind of represented still single objective management, but we used our full suite of modeling tools during that phase to give us a good look at how all of our metrics would pan out and how we would use those in evaluation. All of that information then led us to our iteration 2, which was our array of balanced plans. And those plans were developed to represent the varying perspectives on lake management while combining all the information that we had heard throughout this process. And that's led us to where we are right now. So the next few slides, we'll talk about iteration 2 and selection of the preferred alternative, and then the next steps forward. So our final array of alternatives, which are represented on this slide, there were 6 of them, which represented different perspectives on balancing those congressionally authorized purposes within LOSOM. We won't get too much into the details on these, but they were alternative AA, which focused on performance in the St. Lucie estuary, as well as maximizing our flows to the south. Alternative BB, which focused on water supply performance, which represented a stakeholder view to get us back to performance similar to the water supply under the WSE schedule, which was in place prior to our current schedule, LORS 08. Alternative CC was more of a moderate performance, which still looked to achieve good performance in many areas across the board, while alternative DD, which was looking at trying to represent a perspective that was an incremental improvement for everybody. So as you can imagine, with the system this big, with so much water in it and a lack of storage, which SERP is working to address, there are management challenges, which means there are trade-offs. When you try to increase performance in one area, you're likely going to decrease performance in another. So all of these have trade-offs in performance across the objectives, whereas DD was looking for just a little bit of improvement across the board for everyone without significant improvement for anyone. And then alternatives EE1 and EE2, we're looking at a new way of managing things. Well, the first four schedules looked at a single schedule to manage things year to year. Alternatives EE1 and EE2 looked at management in a different way. They included staged target operations, which means you're trying to make releases and decisions to get to a certain level at a certain time of year under the base schedule. They also included two additional modes or two additional schedules, which allow you to switch the way you're operating, your operating philosophy, depending on where you've been, where you are now, and where you're projected to go. So those included a conservation mode when you're looking to conserve water in the lake for water supply, but for the environment and municipal agricultural needs. And then a recovery mode, which based on past performance and current projected performance, would look at switching to a schedule that manages for lake recovery, so in managing for the health of the lake. So it's a little bit different way of managing than we typically have. Quick overview of the iteration 2 performance, which leads us to our preferred alternative. This spider graphic or dream catcher shows you, based on key metrics that were determined through coordination with the PDT, the performance of these alternatives. Overall, we had over 60 performance metrics that were looked at in this process, but the 11 that are identified here were kind of the key ones that were worked through with the PDT. The best performance is out and away from the center, so a performance level of 1, and these are all compared against the no action alternative, which is this black line here. As you may see, CC is highlighted here, and it does end up being our preferred alternative because it best represents balance through all of these objectives. It has pretty good performance across the board. For all of these objectives, without being necessarily the best in any one, but based on this, it seemed to represent the best balance that we could achieve under this plan. Now, this is not the final version of the schedule, and we'll talk about the next steps shortly. So alternative CC, the vision for that was to honor the perspective on balance that enhances Caloosahatchee ecology by providing low and optimal flows and reducing extreme high flows greater than 6,500 CFS, enhancing the ecology of the St. Lucie estuary by reducing Lake Okeechobee releases, enhancing Everglades ecology by providing more fresh water to the south, and improving water supply performance as compared to the no action condition. And it generally does achieve all of these goals in the original vision of balance. Over the last several weeks, we've spent consulting with stakeholders around the state to get their views on alternatives plan CC and ways that we can optimize that as we move forward into our next iteration, or iteration 3, to make this a better plan, to make this to enhance it through tweaking of the schedule itself and the operational logic, but also areas where we can develop operational guidance, which are kind of those words and directions to the water managers that provide flexibility in the decision-making process and maybe get at some of the areas not specifically addressed in the lake schedule lines themselves. This is just a quick look at what the current version of that preferred alternative CC looks like. Some of the areas that we've heard from stakeholders over the last several weeks on areas to optimize were to look at this flows south, which currently stops at this zone E line and doesn't allow water to move to the west or to the south as you move below that. That's one area where stakeholders have asked us to look at moving more water to the south and having flexibility to move water to the west when it needs it for estuary health. We've also heard that some of the releases to the west, to the Caloosahatchee estuary, especially in the stressful zones, are higher than ideal, and that may be an area of optimization that we would want to look at with this schedule. Also, water supply performance does not meet some of the stakeholder requests to get back to something similar to pre-LORS 08 performance, and lake health itself is not positively affected by this schedule. So those are some of the areas through the discussions with stakeholders that we've heard that alternative CC, both in the optimization and operational guidance development, may be improved as we move forward in this process. So overall, kind of what are the next steps in LOSOM? So as I mentioned, there is preferred alternative optimization and operational guidance development. So these two steps are going to happen in parallel over the next several months. The final preferred alternative and optimization goals will be announced on August the 9th, which I think this presentation will happen after that, so that information will already be out there. Optimization is kind of tweaking the lines and the logic on the schedule to try to meet some of the optimization goals to improve CC. And operational guidance, as I mentioned, are the criteria, kind of the words, the manual itself that provide direction to the water managers and flexibility in operations to address things that may be more of a one-off scenario, not a expected thing that would happen every year. So some additional guidance, and that's will be developed as we move forward and actually written into the water control plan and documented in the EIS. We'll continue to involve our PDT in this process to help us write the guidance. There's a lot of knowledgeable stakeholders out there that can be a great value as we start writing the words. The plan will then be to roll out the final schedule and put pens down on development of that guidance on October the 14th, and then start the documentation process with the draft EIS and water control plan development. The schedule has us releasing that draft EIS and water control plan February 11th of next year, at which point it will undergo review from our agency partners and the public. We'll take that feedback, update that draft EIS and water control plan, as well as incorporate the final biological opinion from the Fish and Wildlife Service into a final document, which will be released next summer in the July timeframe for final review. Then that will go to our South Atlantic Division offices in Atlanta for review and final approval via record of decision in November of next year. So a lot of work to be done between now and then, and a lot of stakeholder involvement as we move forward in this process. But thank you for your time, and hopefully this has provided a good update of where we are in the LOSOM effort.